I think maybe what would be good, Jumi, is if you give us a bit of background on yourself and what you do. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, hi everyone. Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm a music supervisor and cultural curator at an agency called Pitch and Sync. So I've been there for about 2.5 years now, working as a music supervisor. Before that, and even now, I was a freelance journalist, and yeah, I'm still doing it a bit now. I've actually picked up a bit more recently just because I've had less music supervision work. So Pitch and Sync, we primarily work with ads and branded content and a bit of editorial. We do a little bit of long form, but it's mostly advertising. And essentially, it's my job to source and license music for use in those adverts. So that can be commercial music, production music, so like library music, or bespoke compositions, so like working hands-on with composers. And then I also have to do all of the licensing and fun legal bits as well. Yeah.
The fun legal bits.
Yeah.
Um, how did you make your way into uh, Pitch and Sync? Not just Pitch and Sync the company, but
But then also,
more
yeah.
generally, how did you make your way into that side of the industry?
So it was quite, so as a like teenager, I did a bunch of like work experience and stuff in like record labels, but mostly in like marketing, and I think I did press as well. And oh wait, can you hear Kiana? Sorry, I just saw you were connecting to audio. Um, yeah, so I did all of that. So I kind of built up my CV, just having kind of general music stuff, nothing to do with sync. And then when was it? So it was about 3-ish years ago was when I kind of discovered what music supervision was, and I was like, oh, I want to do something like that. So then I literally just started like cold calling and like emailing and harassing people on LinkedIn, basically, who had anything to do with sync and music supervision. And the old head of music at Pitch and Sync was one of the people who got back to me. So I ended up just sending him a bunch of playlists that I'd made. So like playlists that were in relation to like themes. So a lot of the time as a music supervisor, they'll like the client will send you a brief and it will be like, we're looking for a song that does this, that, or the other. So there's like an advert with like families who want it to be warm and happy and whatever. So I'd had all of these playlists made for like, um, running playlists, or like, oh, it's spring playlist, or like work playlists, or like summer playlists, just playlists that had like a very loose theme. And I sent it over, and they were like, oh, these are kind of good. Do you want to have a go at doing a brief? And so I did. And then they were like, oh, that was quite good as well. So then they kept me on as a freelancer. And so I freelanced with them for about 6 months, and then I went full time, and then I've sort of been there ever since, really.
Nice, nice. Did you feel like well, you said that originally you reached out on LinkedIn, and I guess
Mm.
now that you're working in at Pitch and Sync, I'm guessing that people were responsive. But
Yeah.
did it feel like there was a barrier to enter that part of the industry, and did you feel like maybe there wasn't an opportunity for you know young voices or voices that didn't have much experience in that side
Oh,
of the industry
yeah.
to break in?
Yeah, definitely. And I think there wasn't really a great deal of or at least there wasn't a very clear way to enter as well. Like there wasn't much about it like online, or at least, everything was like, oh, get an internship. And it's like, well, that's not the easiest thing to do. You still have to apply for the internships, and the internships still need to be there. And I think, as I was saying earlier, a lot of things are about like who you know. So a lot of people who have done internships or work experience at these companies, just is usually a case of like, oh, who do you know that's like impressed you recently, or like has someone got in contact or whatever, it's someone's mate's son or something like that. So I'm really keen to have things be a bit more transparent and a bit open, and I think especially now, whilst people don't have loads of work going on, like lots of shoots aren't happening, people can be a lot more responsive. And I think as
Sure.
well, because I wrote this article a few weeks ago about there being a lack of Black music supervisors. So now people are kind of waking up a bit to the fact that they should kind of be a bit more open to having different sort of people involved in it, because it is very much sort of like a white man's club, unfortunately.
I mean, I think you know, a lot of the music industry is that way, and I think that comes down to kind of a tendency towards mirror hiring, you know, just trying to hire people that basically have the exact same experience as you, life experience, work experience, because you feel that there'll be a comfortable culture fit or whatever that is, you know. And
or even like oh, sorry.
No, go on, you go. Yeah.
But even like with music taste, so like I'm from a kind of more like indie guitar music background, and so I kind of found a lot of common ground with a lot of older white men, unfortunately. so if you're not from that background, if you're talking a completely different language, or like if you're, you know, if you're into like, for example, I don't imagine many of the older people will be into drill because they just don't get it. Whereas if you're like an expert on drill, they'd be like, huh, what? I mean, I guess maybe now, because that can kind of be considered a bit of a commodity, or like, you know, oh, we don't know anyone who's into drill, so this person would be good. Maybe that's a bad example, but yeah, no, I think people are really into like having some kind of common ground with other people. So I think it's only really now people are waking up to the fact that, you know, being diverse is actually really handy from a business point of view, because you can cover a lot more ground that way.
Yeah, and you don't, you know, if you don't have a diverse range of opinion and a diverse, you know, workforce, or even if you're a freelancer, a diverse group of consultants that you work with regularly, you get stuck in a rut. And I think it becomes very easy for the music industry to pass you very quickly. And I think that's what's happening now to a lot of these older companies that haven't fostered a diverse range of opinion for whatever reason. They haven't been able to move, you know, and I think that you're right. People are seeing that now, and they're realizing that it needs to happen. I got a question here from Hannah, which kind of speaks to that, what you were speaking about earlier, which is, she asked, does that old boys club mentality extend to the kind of music and musicians who are commissioned for sync work?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, I think things are changing, but I think especially with composers, people kind of just go with who they know, or people will just go with who they know, or with, you know, people that, you know, there's a very big thing about people who are jacks of all trades. So like people who just, they know that they can like win a job. So they're not really I don't really consider it to be a risk, to be honest, to go with someone different, but that people aren't taking those risks, or like going for newer talent because they know they've got this safe pair of hands who's worked in the music industry for like 25 years. Whereas, you know, I much more enjoy working with people who aren't seasoned composers, because they have a different approach, and it can often sort of bring a freshness to briefs. I think if you're so used to composing to adverts, there's a very clear sound that you have, and it's kind of a sound that people have heard before. And whilst that may obviously win you the job, it's just not the most exciting thing to be working on. So
have you found brands and production companies and people who are commissioning work with you be more open to commissioning, you know, drill or grime or trap music a bit more than they were before?
No, I think so for example, with advertising, I feel like it's like a good 5 or so years behind. Like, so there was the Ikea advert with DWE Christmas, and all of a sudden everyone was like in love with grime. But it's like, if you talk to I don't know, someone who's 21 or below, like grime isn't really anywhere near as hot as it used to be. But now people are acting like, you know, it's the second coming and oh my god, grime. Whereas like before, you know, I curated this event actually last year because we were receiving briefs that had like grime references and stuff, and then people would comment and say like, oh, grime's aggressive, or like use very loaded terms, and it's like, well, you can't really, or, you know, we'd get a lot of like, oh, we're looking for something urban, and then not much explanation beyond that. And it's like, we're here to help solve a musical problem here, so we need to know what you mean. And it doesn't help if you throw out these umbrella terms, or if you use loaded language, because, you know, if you say, okay, grime is aggressive, what do you want as an alternative? And then they don't give us an answer, and it's like, okay, well, right. You know, we're trying to help you here. So yeah, I think people will wake up to like drill, and we've had a little bit of trap and stuff, but I don't really think it's going to really, I think it will take someone using it in a really interesting way in a campaign for people to wake up and realize like, oh yeah, that's what people are listening to. But then by then it's like, you know, drill's already pretty mainstream. So, but people kind of treat it as if it's like still this like underground genre. Yeah.
Do you ever get the feeling that brands or production companies are scared of alienating an audience by taking, you know, a drill track or a grime track on commission? And do you feel like sometimes that stifles the ability for music supervisors to be creative in their role?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's this thing about people wanting to appeal to the masses or appeal to the majority, and I completely understand that. But I think there's not enough. So, for example, I think that the DW Ikea campaign worked so well because it was very clearly still advertising homewares, but it was, you know, an artist who was staying very true to his craft, but then also being really fun and like sort of making his music appealable to a wider audience. And so it's very clear that there are ways to do that, but I think too many brands are too scared to do things like that, or just, you know, assume like, oh, there's not enough buying power amongst these like smaller demographics, when in reality, you know, like Black people are probably one of the largest demographics in terms of buying power in the country. So I don't really, I don't know, it's a difficult one. I think some brands are better than others at doing it, but I think there needs to be more of an effort from kind of the more kind of mainstream kind of family brands. I think is so often that those styles of music are relegated, or not relegated, but, you know, it's always in like fast fashion or like sportswear or like fast food or, you know, alcohol. Like it's always associated with youth. And like, obviously I know a lot of the artists who are making these styles are young, but that doesn't mean that they should only be talking to a younger demographic.
Right. I mean, I guess, you know, from a marketing point of view, you're hoping you can hit the golden age range demographic of like 16 to 22, 16 to 23. But beyond that, I mean, I'm 27, and, you know, there are people who are 5, 6, 7, 10 years older than me who wouldn't blink twice at there being a grime track on an advert or a drill track on a big branded ad. And I do find it a bit strange that, because, you know, your job essentially is to be a music brain, you know, a repository of music information, know all the songs and be able to provide the right track for the right moment. And I guess because maybe traditionally the world of sync has been, you know, a world filled with, you know, white men or an older demographic or a whiter demographic, then your ability to be creative in your role maybe is slightly stifled. I think Keely has a question. Oh no, sorry, you go first. You go.
No, I think that's sort of the biggest frustration of it. It's not being able to work, like not being able to use the breadth of my knowledge. Like I think it can be, especially at the beginning of sort of the COVID era or whatever you want to refer to it. You know, we had a lot of the briefs from like the supermarkets and just people who were getting their message out there about COVID and showing that they cared. And pretty much everyone was like, you know, you want something warm, something to do with togetherness, with this and that. And it was like, by the end of it, I was just sending the same playlist out to everyone because everyone was asking for the same thing. So it's quite frustrating when you can't really use the skills that you have.
Sure. I've got a question here from Kiana. I'm gonna unmute her and let her ask her question to you. Maybe Kiana, you can come on video as well if you want.
Hello. Sorry, 1 second. My phone died. Hi. Oh.
Hi.
Hello. So my question was a bit random, but I just wanted to touch on when you were speaking about composers. And sometimes if you're working with them, when they're creating bespoke pieces of music for a project, how do you find that process, and what exactly is that process? And as you're talking about sometimes finding it hard to be as creative, or there's like a lack of understanding sometimes, maybe if you want to suggest certain artists or a certain genre. So if you're working with a composer that might be working out of his usual style, like how do you find that process, and like how do you go about communicating with them to get the right piece of music for a project?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, with the composers, I mean, we're quite lucky in that I'm always finding new artists, and I think I'll never put a composer on a brief if it's completely out of their style, or if it's something that just doesn't work for them, just because I feel like it will just be too much hard work for all involved. But yeah, working with the composers, so typically we'll receive the brief, and basically it's my job to act as the middleman and kind of mediate things, because a lot of the time people from the advertising agencies are speaking in a language that just doesn't really translate musically. So I've just kind of effectively got to translate and get the feedback from them. So sometimes I'll ask for things, and then the composer will like say like, but that doesn't really make sense, and it's like, that's just what they want. Like, you know, I've got to try and make it make sense. And it's basically really just going back and forth using my sort of musical and advertising awareness to kind of help the composer, kind of, especially if it's someone who's kind of new to working on ads or working with and scores. If it's someone who's seasoned, I don't really do too much other than really like going back and forth. Whereas if it's someone who is quite new to it, it's a bit more of the coaching and you're a bit more hands-on, which I quite enjoy. I think there is also the fear though, like with those newer composers, that I don't want to compromise their sound too much to make it sound too like sync friendly or like sound like all the other stuff. But at the same time, you know, there is this expectation from the advertising agency that it will sound a certain way, and like it's there are some tracks you can tell, you know, so you can maybe even try it yourself, like when you're watching TV, and try and pick out whether something is a commercial track or whether it's a library track or whether it's a bespoke track. I think the longer you work in it, you can figure it out, but it's quite interesting to hear. You can pretty much always tell what kind of track it is just because of the way it sounds. Yeah, it's quite an interesting one. But yeah, no, with working with composers, it's always quite a fun process. And I think I mean, to be fair, it depends who you're working with. Some people can be like difficult, but a lot of the time they're really like understanding. And yeah, it's always handy having people who, you know, are used to creating stuff in a particular space. So like they might have access to a studio, or at least have access to some sort of equipment. Like we always ask people, you know, average, like what sort of time would this take you, especially with advertising. The turnover time is quite quick, whereas with like film and TV, you're working on it for several months, sometimes even years. So with advertising, we always need to make sure that they can, you know, turn over things quite quickly. They're able to go back and do amends, basically making sure that they understand what's needed of them.
Nice.
Thank you.
No worries.
I have a bit of maybe a niche question, which is, and you might not want to answer this, but on the commissioning side, you know, there's a lot of songwriting and production tools that are based on sampling or samples, and you know, you've got sample catalogs,
Yeah.
subscriptions, things like Splice and stuff like that. In terms of clearance and licensing, do you take tracks that have used, where the producer might have used a service like Splice or a sample library? Because I know those clearances they exist in a grey area,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we typically try to avoid that. I think anything, unless the sample's already been cleared, or unless there's, I think it's much easier to work on something that's wholly original. Obviously, you're always going to get people using samples or using, beats that have been made elsewhere or whatever. But I think as long as I always kind of ensure that there is some, ensure that, that has been pre-cleared, or that, everything is sort of like part of like a whole package, because otherwise, it is a bit of a nightmare to then go back and have to, license everything retrospectively. And so that's something that I try to kind of establish at the beginning, that we are creating something bespoke and original for this project, unless otherwise specified. So
another question here from Hannah: what's been your favorite campaign to work on, and why?
I'd say it's a tie between two. I think my first ever sync was an Ikea ad that ran until recently, actually. I don't know if you saw it. It's like these kids running around the house and there's like stuff flying about. I don't really know. So that was my first ever sync, and so that was really exciting. And it's literally just like a song that I just randomly stumbled across on Spotify that I put forward, and I didn't really think much about it, and they were like, oh yeah, we love it, and I'm like, oh okay. No, so it's either that or Zalando, which is like sort of like the European version. It's not really like, is it like ASOS? I don't know. It's like the European version of ASOS. So they did an ad last year, and so my sort of special area was kind of like the quirkier stuff, like sort of digging to find stuff that just sounds a bit weird or just a bit out there, usually by like lo-fi artists or just like outsider artists. So they initially briefed like really, really wacky, crazy stuff. And so I sent them that, and they were like, maybe it's a bit too crazy. So then they ended up going for another track that I put forward, which is kind of like a, how would I describe it? It's I mean, I can send you the link to it, but it's like a kind of pop song that's quite quirky, and like the campaign just looked really cool, and I just think it all worked really well together. And I got a lot of people just saying how much they loved it. So probably those two.
That's amazing. Back to you said something there early on about you just stumbled across a tune on Spotify, and I was wondering what the kind of the Spotify discovery process, like the way that they allow users to discover new music, has how that has helped you.
I think at the beginning, I don't really use it like discovery wise, or like I don't really use their like radio feature or anything like that. I kind of use it just more for cataloging things and just sort of keeping like different folders and playlists of stuff. But in terms of like how I discover music, it's mostly through like labels and publishers sending stuff to me, or me just kind of digging through all kinds of different places. So like I try not to rely just on Spotify, so I'll go on like SoundCloud or Bandcamp. I'm trying to use TikTok, but I find it very frustrating. It's not the best way to discover new music, also because a lot of the time you can't tell whether that person has created that track or not. Like I know sometimes it has original sound at the bottom, but sometimes you don't know whether it's actually from that person. So I'm not really, I want to, because everyone's obviously always talking about TikTok, I just want to like find something on there, but I find it very frustrating. But also Reddit as well is really good for music, even though it's very clunky and there's a lot to go through on there. And then just like kind of surrounding myself with lots of music stuff. So like reading books and watching documentaries. And I think another way as well is like, if you want to get into it, is like study sort of what songs or what styles are in adverts at the moment, or in films and TV. Like if there's a particular film or TV show that you love the music, you know, approach that music supervisor and like chat to them about the music. And especially now, they'll probably be a lot more receptive just because there's no work. I think that's sort of definitely, definitely watching a lot of TV shows. Recently, I've kind of picked up on some that I like really like their use of music, and I'm just sort of, you know, I'll then go on Spotify and then just look up the soundtrack and then just like listen through that and like pick out particular songs. And
Nice. Is there, well, obviously there is, but how do you manage the difference between, you know, a label will send you a track which they want you to commission on a project, you know, and then you might find a track out of nowhere that you have to get in contact with the artist and work through that process. What does that look like? I assume it's much easier, obviously, when the label reaches out to you with permissions and licenses and stuff.
Yeah.
But when you're searching, can that process be quite frustrating?
Yeah, it can be. I mean, I quite like it. I'm a bit of a, like, I love like digging and I love researching. I mean, we had a project not too long ago with their co-op, and I'd found this track, literally like it was some lost like Belgian ska track, and it was like the only song, or like the A and B side, it was the only thing that this band released in 1980. And I was going through literally like everyone in Belgium trying to track down the writers. I was like ringing like the Flemish music board and all this stuff, and then I like found the writers, and then I like just Googled them, and I found one of them on LinkedIn, and I think now he's like a management consultant. And I rang him up and I was like, oh, so were you in this band in 1980? And he was like, I haven't heard about that since 1980. How do you know about this? And then he was like, yeah, I haven't spoken to the other guys in the band in years, but like then I like basically managed to track them down, and like we got them, I licensed it with them directly and everything, just within the space of a few hours as well. So it was crazy. I mean, that's not the norm, but yeah, it can end up stuff like that. You going through, I've had to go through like Facebook before and stuff like that just to track people down. So yeah.
I look forward to the 4-part Netflix mini series of you tracking down, going through like the Flemish.
Yeah.
Keely here asks, what would your best piece of advice be for anyone looking to get into sync?
I mean, I think, yeah, like I mentioned before, I think finding the music, or like finding the way that music has been used that you really like. So if there's an advert that you really like the use of music, or like a campaign that you really like the use of music, or like a particular artist that you love, and like a brand partnership maybe where they've done like some sort of bespoke angle to it. So if they've done like, you know, how I think like Kelly Rowland did something with Dove, like I think she did a song with them. So if you really like that, finding out who worked on that and reaching out to them, like I said, with like film and TV, you know, finding out the supervisors of your favorite TV shows and getting in contact with them. It's very easy to find this out via like IMDb, or like going on LinkedIn, or like a lot of people have their own websites as well. Yeah, so Twitter as well is good. Yeah.
For reaching out to people.
Yeah.
Is it quite a small industry?
Yeah, definitely. So I think there are like little kind of pockets. So I think in Europe, London is very much sort of like the hub, but then you also got like quite a few people based in Amsterdam, but then because they're so close, people are going back and forth. And then in the US, like LA is kind of where it's at, especially for film and TV. You do have some people based in New York as well. And then in like Nashville too, just because that's sort of like now becoming a bit more of a, I mean, it's always been like a music hub, but even more so now. But yeah, so I mean, everyone's sort of got their own kind of sync, because it's so small. Everyone's kind of got these communities, and like people kind of talk to each other. A lot of people being in London, a lot of people come to London anyway. I mean, obviously now, but maybe not so. But yeah, no, people have kind of got everyone kind of knows everyone really. And we do like regular sort of networking events, or like, you know, we recently did like a virtual pub quiz with everyone and stuff like that. So yeah, it's quite easy once you're in. It's kind of it's difficult to leave.
What has your experience been of kind of moving up the ladder? Because obviously you began by, you know, pitching playlists that you made to sync companies, and now you're working, you know, on branded commissions with people like Ikea and Co-op. So what was it like to move through that process?
Yeah, so I've been quite fortunate. I mean, so when I joined my company, it was only 5 of us, and now we're a team of like 12. So I was quite fortunate when I joined. I kind of had the space to grow with the company. But I think also it's just through kind of making sure that I was constantly kind of networking with people at labels and just sort of making sure that I was out there, really kind of putting myself forward for jobs as well. So when I was working, you know, if I overheard someone was working on something else and it was of interest to me, I'd be like, hey, can I do a bit for this? Just sort of really kind of showing that you're passionate about it and that you want to progress as well. Because I think also there's this, I think especially being a music supervisor, a lot of the companies that have music supervisors in-house are quite small. So it's just the case of getting those credits and building on them. But I think just sort of making sure that you are a presence, making, you know, going, I mean, obviously we can't go to gigs anymore, but like going to gigs with labels, you know, just constantly kind of making sure that you're on people's radars. And also, you know, networking within the other sector. So if it's like film and TV, you know, chatting to producers and directors, and if it's advertising, you're chatting to creatives and producers and brand managers and stuff like that, sort of making sure that you're known and you're a friendly face as well, not being too pushy as well. I just tend to like lead with music and what sort of music people are into and stuff like that. I tend, to be fair, I should talk about work a lot more, but I just tend not to talk about work.
If we have a couple of mentees who are interested in artist management and hands-on artist marketing. If you're early on and you're an artist manager, you're managing a couple of artists, what would be the best way to approach someone in sync in order to get your artist work commissioned?
I think definitely, I think the biggest thing that I would say to anyone is make sure that all of the music is in one place. I think I get very frustrated when I get like loads and loads of links, because then I just know that I'm just never really going to get around to listening to it. So I think there's that sort of pointing out exactly what their sound is. So rather than just saying like, oh, I've got this pop act, just saying like, you know, does ethereal pop music that you could compare to Lord or something, I don't know. Maybe doing a bit of research on a music supervisor as well. So finding out, you know, what sort of previous projects they've worked on and like what sort of brands that they've worked with. Some are a lot more kind of present than others, so that might be hard to figure out. But, you know, some people are quite, say for example, I guess it helps because I do journalism, so people can kind of figure out my kind of taste through that. But if you know that someone is a fan of something or other, you know, being like, oh, I've got this artist, I know you might be a fan. I think definitely kind of personalizing your emails or your contact with them, because I think it's very easy to spot what is a BCC and what's, you know, an actual kind of someone wanting to really well. And I think also reaching out, not just to be like, oh, can you pitch this? Reaching out just when they've got new music out or when they're working on something interesting. I think that I'm always keen to hear about that, as opposed to like, oh, can you pitch this? I think finding out, you know, that the artist is like steadily working on things and what they are working on. I think that's always quite interesting. Yeah.
If for you, are there things that you can see kind of coming down the pipeline that will either make your job easier or harder, technology wise?
Yeah, so there have been quite a few like AI kind of tools for music discovery. So there are kind of, I know there's one, God, what's the name of that? I can't remember the name of it, but it's one where you type in the brief and then it picks out keywords and then it like suggests tracks. I don't like, I obviously think that those sorts of things are great, and I think it's just sort of a sign of the way technology is going, but also I don't really want to rely on stuff like that, and I quite like, you know, digging and finding new stuff and just sort of talking to people about what music they're listening to, and I don't think you can really beat that. I think that there are obviously those shortcuts, and especially if you've got a brief and they're like, oh, we need options back in like an hour, and it's like, well, I can't do that, so I'll just type, you know. I think things are there'll definitely be a lot more of those sorts of things, a lot of AI kind of things about,
could you talk a bit more about your journalism and what the interplay is between that and your role as a music supervisor, and maybe whether, you know, you recently wrote a great article which actually Kiana messaged me about after I had also just read it, about music supervision and being Black in sync. Could you talk a bit about, you know, your journalism and maybe how you felt not just that article would be received by the sync community, but also, you know, all the other stuff that you write?
Yeah, I mean, with that article, it's quite funny. So I originally pitched it like a few months ago. So before all of before like the resurgence of Black Lives Matter, and before basically people would care. And then everything happened, and I was kind of like, oh, okay, well, this is interesting. So it's kind of good that people were kind of already talking about that sort of stuff, and then the article came out. But yeah, no, I think generally I think it helps with me kind of being on top of things. I think when you're a journalist, you kind of got to figure out what's going on culturally. You kind of got to be on top of trends and top of like music, like new music and stuff. You can't really, you know, like my bosses, they're in their 40s, and you know, they don't really know much about a lot of the stuff that's coming out now, and I guess they've been in it long enough to where they don't really need to. Whereas me, I've always kind of got to stay on top of things. And yeah, I think with journalism, that just makes sure that I am constantly doing that. So yeah, it's definitely informed that. Yeah.
How do you stay on top of all the new music that you have to digest on a daily basis for your job and not end up hating music and listening to music?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have those days where I just don't listen to any music, and I think that's very healthy as well. I think you can kind of, your ears will just like not, it's very, because you get sent so much music, it kind of does whoever's sending it to you a disservice if you just can't really listen to it properly. So I just try to give myself lots of breaks. I think as well, like I've really enjoyed over the COVID period, like because we haven't had loads of work, I've been able to go back to listening to music sort of as a fan, as opposed to listening to it and thinking, oh, where can I place that? Or, oh, that could go well in that sort of, you know. So I think that's been quite nice. And I think I'm kind of retraining my ears, because I think you do, once you're in it for a while, you do start to listen to music completely differently and kind of listen to it for its sort of further commercial value as opposed to what it actually is. So.
Do you ever sit at your desk and kind of go think about, you know, if you've got a load of tracks that have been sent to you by a label, do you ever go and pitch cold to brands or pitch cold to production companies, or are you mostly waiting for briefs to come in?
It's mostly waiting for briefs. I think the only time I'll send stuff cold is if it's a contact that I know really well and like I know what sort of music they're into. I think just because a lot of the time when you do that, like you don't really know, I think things kind of change with accounts quite a lot. So someone could have been working on IKEA like however many months ago, and now they're no longer working on it. So if I have a track that I think would be perfect for IKEA, it's kind of, you know, it wouldn't really make sense to send to that person because they're no longer working on it. So I think because things change so much, I just tend to only stick with doing that with my like really close contacts.
Is your contact base, you know, primarily, does it mirror you and where you are in your career, or do you end up speaking to a lot of people who are older, or you know, a lot of people who are in a different point in their career?
Yeah, so I'm I think it's a good mix. I mean, yeah, I do work quite like I do have quite a lot of FaceTime with like senior, you know, creative directors and stuff like that. So yeah, I think it is quite interesting, and I've never really thought about it as like mirroring the point in my career. It's just sort of me just kind of doing my job, I guess. No, I don't really kind of think that, oh, this is a really senior person, and I think that's quite good as well, because that it just means I'm not really all that fearful about working with anyone. Like even if you're like a CEO or something, it's kind of like, okay, well, you know, you still like music and I'm still the one picking the music like here, so you know, it's yeah, it's quite yeah, it kind of gives you like a good perspective, and like it kind of allows you to not be too scared about approaching people and like talking to more senior people.
I think that's an important point, because I think if you find yourself in a position maybe slightly younger than you thought you would be in that position, because like you've grown with a small company into a position which maybe wasn't there before, wasn't vacant, or you know, like myself, you start a company and suddenly you find yourself in meetings with people where you feel could quite easily feel invalidated being in that room. I think it's it, and maybe that will be the case for a lot of our mentees early on. You know, you're speaking to people who are a lot older than you or with a lot more experience. How did you navigate that and develop that confidence to be in that room?
I think, yeah, I mean, it's probably for her mum. Like her biggest saying is the worst anyone can say to you is no. So it just means I just kind of go for everything. I think as well, like I think it's just the case of like I've had to just kind of deal with things. I've kind of just had to accept the fact that I'm probably always going to be the youngest in the room. I mean, maybe not like in a few years' time. I think also I just kind of get along with people, and I don't really use my age as a factor in anything, or like I don't really yeah, I think you just kind of have to force yourself to be mature and stuff, and yeah.
mature and stuff.
Yeah.
How do you feel sync plays into a larger kind of artist marketing campaign? You know, can sync be an anchor point to build the rest of your campaign outwards, and do you have labels and managers coming to you and saying, look, we think this is a track for sync and we feel like we can build around that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot less than you'd think. I think it's quite difficult. We do get a lot of people coming to us and being like, oh, we really want to get this sync, and it's like, well, you know, we're just not working with anyone at the moment where this would fit. I think everything's quite ad hoc, and it's much easier to work when you've kind of got a loose creative, or you've kind of got the brand and then they're looking for an artist to fit in with it. I think when you've got an artist and they're like, oh, I just want to sing, it's quite difficult to then, unless they're like a really big name, or unless they've got a lot to go with, it's very hard to then convince the brand manager or convince the producer of this campaign to be like, hey, do you want to work with such and such? Because it's like, well, we didn't ask you. So, you know, it's quite hard unless you're like Ed Sheeran or Stormzy. It's quite difficult to do that. Yeah.
Did you see on either that I think maybe an interesting case would be that co-op campaign that you worked with, which is a niche track and maybe something that people wouldn't have ever come across before, or even the IKEA campaign. Did you see like a broad then further pickup for those artists within their projects, you know?
I mean, definitely with DWE, I think with the co-op thing, just because they don't actually record music anymore, it's kind of a different case. But yeah, I do think like sync has definitely helped. I mean, so for example, like Freya Ridings, without getting her track in Love Island, I don't think she'd be anywhere near as big as she is now. So it can really sort of make careers. So it's quite interesting, and it's quite interesting to see, like, so for example, you know, I used to watch Love Island and I didn't really pay much attention to the track, and then all of a sudden it's this huge thing, and it's like, oh, okay, I didn't realize it resonated that much with people. So you can never really predict these things. Yeah,
people really Shazam, you know,
yeah.
people really actually use Shazam.
And I think as well, I think there's this perception, I think especially because of, say, people like Freya Ridings or DWE, like you get that sync and then all of a sudden your career is going to skyrocket, and it's like, it's not necessarily the case. Yeah, it just depends on how people respond to it, really.
What would you say to someone who is not just maybe looking to get into sync, but looking to build out their sync offering to their clients, or kind of get into conversations with you, or get into conversations with other music supervisors? What are the tools that they can use, and what are the networking opportunities that are available?
Yeah, I think just firstly making sure you've got like a clear and cohesive offering. So it doesn't matter if you're only working with one artist or a couple of artists, just sort of making sure that, you know, they can stand out, or at least like we can understand what you're presenting to us. I think in terms of networking opportunities, I mean, obviously now it's kind of different, but I think getting in touch with people directly, you know, making sure that it's like a personalized response to them. I'm just trying to think in terms of like out in the real world. I mean, like, it's always nice to just go for coffee or like just a casual. I mean, a lot of people will be able to find the time, maybe not immediately, but you know, I always try to get back to people, and like at least try to, I mean, now like do like a Zoom call or like a phone call or something. Yeah, I think just sort of making sure that you're actually like being personable, as opposed to like just sort of sending music your way, you know. Follow up as well, you know, a lot of the time if someone doesn't respond, it's probably, you know, you do get those people who just won't respond for whatever reason, but with me it's probably just because I missed it, or that I was busy, or that, you know, sometimes I designate some days to listening to music, and you know, if I miss a day that week, that means I have to do it another day the next week, so it just means that I just haven't got around to doing it, but I will eventually. Yeah,
I think that's great. I think we can probably end here, unless there are any more conversations from the crowd to drop in the Q&A. What might be good is if you kind of let our mentees know, maybe you know, a bit more about the company that you work for, Pitch and Sync, and what they should keep an eye out for.
Yeah, so yeah, Pitch and Sync, so we've been around for almost about 15 years now. It's based in London, in Shoreditch. So we're a music and sound agency, so we do all of the music supervision stuff, as well as doing like brand partnerships, and composition, audio branding, sound design as well. Yeah, in terms of what to look out for, we're working on a few bits at the moment, but yeah, no, I obviously can't say anything about them, but yeah, hoping that some more work will come in. Oh, sorry, I saw a thing pop up about jobs, and
Oh
yeah, so I mean, a lot of people will post on like Music Business Worldwide, or like Music Week, Doors Open as well. I think also, like, I sometimes post things in Social Fixed, the Facebook group, and also LinkedIn is good as well. Yeah, I'm trying to like convince, there's a Guild of Music Supervisors job board as well. I don't know if that's open to everyone though.
yeah, right.
But like using LinkedIn, and like using the term like sync or music sync or music supervision in the search tool. Yeah, just try to connect with music supervisors as well, or like people who are working in sync, like sync managers as well. A lot of people are quite receptive. So yeah, and yeah, there are some Facebook groups as well. I'm in a lot of them are kind of, I'm in a lot of like the women ones, so like there's a ladies music pub, I think, which is like a general music one, but I know quite a few of my sync friends are in it as well. Yeah. I think that's about it, really. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for coming on and chatting to us.
Also, if you look up like different sync companies or labels or publishers and looking at their job boards as well, and or getting in contact with HR or whoever is like on their website. Yeah.
Cool. Amazing. Yeah, well thanks for joining us and having a chat. That was really informative, lots of stuff that I didn't know, and I'm sure lots of stuff that our mentees can learn from. And yeah, hopefully we'll be able to have you back on and chat again soon.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you very much.